Hello and welcome to Face to Face. We're filming this in mid-March. My guest today is Carlos Flores. Carlos is with the Central American Support Committee here in Victoria. My name is Jack Etkin, your host. Carlos, maybe you can just tell us a bit about what the Central American Support Committee.
Central America Support Committee is a solidarity committee established in 1979, bringing Victorians together to disclose and to talk about important issues in Central America. The committee, the interesting part of this is that the committee was originally started after a trip to El Salvador by then Bishop Remy de Roo from the Victoria Diocese. And ever since, a group of people got together and we've been working to help people in the region and to bring issues to Victoria.
Maybe you can tell us, what are the countries of Central America?
Okay, let me see if I can remember.
Well, some of them anyways, because most of us probably don't know.
Let's start with, right after Mexico, we have Guatemala, we have El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama. Those would be the Central American countries. Of course, Panama wasn't really Panama. It didn't exist, right? Panama was an invention. It didn't exist. It was the result of the partition of Colombia, really.
So Panama used to be part of Colombia.
Yes.
And my recollection of the history is that the United States did not want Colombia to have that part of the country anymore because the Panama Canal was going to be built there.
Yeah.
And
actually,
so
that's basically what it is. Yeah, because by coincidence, after the country partition, the newly formed country Panama, the first thing that they did in the order of business was to grant the license to an American company to open the canal, which Colombia was opposed to it. It actually had the French consortium interested in opening, and there were conversations well in advance for that. So you're right.
I think when we talk about Central America, one of the most fundamental political issues, and really economic issues and social issues in Central America, is the United States. Because, I mean, I really don't know much about it, but the impression I get, the feeling I have, is that the United States runs that part of the world like the back of their hand, and they're free to do things there, even that they can't do in the United States. I mean, the United States is the empire, and they've got to take some care with the people there. But in Central America, they can just go in and loot and pillage, and I think that's what they've done. Maybe I'm wrong.
Generally, yes. That generally they have conducted the business as a big superpower without any due regard for people and any institution, giving lip service to the words such as democracy, freedom of the press, in favor of a very minute ruling elite that controls the lives of people for the benefit of the big metropole. There's a huge problem of poverty. You know, it's Latin America in general, and this is I'm broadening the geographical scope. It's 500. We have 500 million people in there. Out of those 500, 220 live in poverty. Out of those, about 100 million in absolute poverty. So we are talking about 500 million people that are basically excluded in a great measure of what you and I and the audience have in this country that is taken for granted. Clean water, medical care, freedom of the press, although most of the press is really bad.
Yeah, we'll argue about that one later.
No, you won't argue with me about that because I agree with you. But anyway, so the United States has played a very negative role. They could play a better role. I mean, there's a lot of hopes now. I don't know whether the hopes are actually based in reality or more in fiction, now that a new president has taking the reins of the empire. But anyway, the inequality is still persistent for many more years. There's changes, big changes, happening right now, just today. For example, Sunday, the 15th of March.
So Sunday, the 15th of March, there was an event that happened,
Yes,
and it's
in El
of
Salvador.
note. Now,
Very
I think-
historical.
yeah.
Historical.
I knew something about this, and I've been watching in the media. I haven't really seen, heard, or read anything, but there was a very important election in El Salvador, a country, again, of which we know nothing. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about El Salvador, exactly
Sure.
where it is,
Sure.
and how many people live there, and then tell us what happened.
El Salvador, it is the most populated country in Central America, but it's the smallest. It's half the size of Vancouver Island, and it has 5 million people, right? Out of the 5 million people, approximately 1 million lives outside the country. They are nominally Salvadorians, but they live in the U.S.
Or Canada.
or Canada, but more in the U.S. They constitute a very, very important source of economic revenue for the government. They send approximately 22% of the national gross product is obtained through the remittances of the Salvadorians living abroad. That's a huge amount of money.
So you mean people living in the United States and Canada sending money back
That's
to their
right, to their
families.
families, to support their families.
And they've left El Salvador because they can't make a living there.
They can make a living there, a country that is essentially like most of the underdeveloped model is a monoproducer, agricultural country, but with the opening of the market, the free trade agreements, that small campesino that has a small plot of land and, he would survive and sell his crop in the local market. Well, now with the opening of the markets, they have this huge influx of imports. So that campesino is not able to compete, right, with the type of market and with type of commodities that come from the U.S., for example, where the agricultural products are subsidized to a great degree.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because we're always hearing about these free trade deals that are being put in place worldwide. And certainly when I read about them, they always make it sound as if the leaders of Canada, the United States, and Europe are at these meetings trying to do what's best for the poor people of the world, including El Salvador. But what you've just said is that when these free trade deals come into being, the poorest of the poor, the small farmer in these countries, gets wiped out because they can't compete with, that sounds crazy. How can farmers in El Salvador not compete with farmers in the United States? It seems like they should.
Yeah, it's and I tell you what, people like to make it complicated, and it's not very complicated. Are you a sportman? Are you into athletics? Are you into
Yeah.
that type of stuff? Okay. Donovan Bailey.
Donovan
right?
Bailey.
The guy that ran.
Yeah.
Fastest man. No dope, I think. Anyway, he ran fast, right? So let's pretend that Donovan Bailey is the developed market. Let's call him Donovan Bailey USA market, right? And next to him, you put Carlos Flores,
That's you.
me, right? Who can hardly run, right? Unless I'm being chased. Anyways, so you put them to run, right? And you say, Carlos, Donovan Bailey, you're going to run. You both qualify. Well, yeah, I have legs. Yes. I have lungs. I'm built just like him, like Donovan
Sort of.
Bailey. Sort of. In a way, right? Run. Well, of course, Donovan Bailey, he's going to go very fast, and Carlos will walk or maybe collapse, right? Hopefully, right at the beginning, right? So he doesn't have to do the
Be
suffering.
embarrassed.
That's right. So you are putting to compete two totally different individuals. You are putting to compete two totally different economies. Now you can really figure out then what is going to happen, who is going to win, right? The economy in the U.S., in the developed world, they are huge, huge entities. They have been doing this for years and years and years and years. El Salvador is an underdeveloped economy. essentially agricultural, with no infrastructure, if any, endure 12, 14 years of civil war where the infrastructure, whatever it was destroyed, and then they are put to compete with the U.S. It's a total fallacy. It's an absolute fallacy that certainly had worked in the detriment of the poor people in these countries, certainly so.
But if we look at El Salvador as a state, probably if the farmers there were allowed to grow food, they would feed the people of El Salvador quite well, and everybody would have enough food.
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't want to paint like it's an ideal situation, the rural community where everybody's happy, the Shangri-La, because that doesn't exist, right? There's the realities of life. But certainly an economy that would place the interest of those who are enduring the economy, really, because you are suffering the economy in this case, right? In the case of people not able to feed themselves, they are suffering the economy, right? They are the direct recipients of those twisted policies. So it would be nice to think that perhaps a rural economy would do it. In a way, it probably would, but certainly not under depression conditions.
So has there been an opening up of the El Salvadorian market?
Oh, yes. El Salvador subscribed free trade agreements with the U.S. In fact, El Salvador doesn't even have their own currency. They have a dollar. That is their currency, the dollar.
The American dollar?
Yes. Same thing as Ecuador.
Ecuador?
Yes.
So El Salvador and Ecuador don't have their own currency.
No,
they use the U.S. dollar.
That's right. So that tells you how much the dependency has become for these countries. Their economy is totally linked to what is happening in the U.S. Now you can imagine what the consequence would be for a little tiny country like that of 5 million people versus 320 million people. What the consequences would that be if there's an economic problem, right? They're going to be the first to pay for the crisis and the first to pay the consequences.
I know that it's very important for a nation to have its own currency, because if you don't, you really are at the mercy of whoever's currency you're using. There is talk about Canada and the United States taking on a common currency called the Amero. There's nothing in the media about this, but it is being discussed, similar to the euro in Europe, but quite different, of course. That may yet happen. It's impossible to get information, but it's basically under discussion. And then we too would have essentially the U.S. dollar, because the Amero would be the U.S. dollar and we'd just be part of it. So I know things aren't good in El Salvador, and yesterday there was an election.
Yesterday, yes, going back to the original point, yesterday there was an election, and the leftist candidate, Mauricio Funes, who is a former anchorman for CNN News in El Salvador, he was elected with 51% of the popular vote. Now,
elected to be
the president, the next president of El Salvador.
And
yes.
Is the presidency there similar to the presidency of the United States? That kind of
yes, yeah. He'll be elected for a period between 2009 and 2014.
Okay, 5 years.
5 years.
And you say he's a leftist?
Yes, he actually.
One of many leftists being elected in Central and South America.
Yes, he's now joining a group of presidents. Some of them declare openly socialist, and other ones with an anti-capitalist program. For example, in Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and now El Salvador. It's funny because it's actually not funny but ironic, because one of the reasons why Ronald Reagan intervened in El Salvador in 1984, starting in 1984, pouring $1 billion a year in military hardware to defeat the guerrillas, those who today were elected, yesterday were elected, was because he feared what he called the domino theory. You get one government leftist, and then you start getting more and more and more and more and more. And he thought, well, we're going to stop it using military means. And somewhat they did. They did. It cost 250,000 people were killed, disappeared, displaced.
That's worth repeating because 250,000 people killed, wounded,
Yes.
displaced,
Yes.
so that the United States under Ronald Reagan could get the government that it wanted,
Absolutely.
which was not a government that necessarily would benefit the people, but a government that was going to benefit corporate America.
Sure. And that type of government that the Americans favored and supported, it lasted until yesterday, until March 15, 2009. That was the last day when the government was in power. Now, I'm not a great admirer of Clinton, ex-former President Clinton, but he did something that no other president had done during their tenure as president. This is during the presidency. In 1991, he traveled to Guatemala. Guatemala has suffered an incredible catastrophe, human catastrophe during the war, right?
What
There
war?
was a war. There was a war, and again, a right-wing government with death squads killing and exterminating people. President Clinton went to Guatemala after the peace agreements were signed in 1990 between the guerrilla factions and the government. And he apologized. And this is, you can check it, in March 1991, Washington Post, in a little thing like this, I'm not kidding you, it's a little write-up. President Clinton apologizes to Guatemalans for the role that the U.S. played in the killing of like a quarter of a million people. I thought that was incredible. And to me, and that shows you the type of media that we have, to me, that would be front page. President Clinton apologized to Guatemalans for complicity in the death squad crimes.
Folks, did you ever read, or hear the headline, President Clinton apologize for U.S. complicity in death squad crimes? No, and you never, because our media will not tell us and you the truth about what the United States does. I mean, here we've just had two examples. They supported a war in El Salvador, and they supported a war in Guatemala. And believe me, that is barely scratching the surface, because what they've done, not only in every country in Central and South America, but around the world, has been exactly the same. Our media always tells us it's all about freedom and democracy and helping the innocent, but it's the exact opposite. It's corporate America doing what it does around the world, and it's horrible. I mean, we're talking about mass murder. We're talking about terrorism, the very terrorism that they pretend to be so concerned about today. They've perpetrated throughout Central and South America. Can I say that without fear of contradiction?
Absolutely. The state-sponsored terrorism, it's well documented. It's not like you and I are making it up. It's documented. Almost every country in Latin America has a truth commission, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, what usually took place after events, very traumatic events had taken place in those countries. There was a civil war, a military coup, and after a period of time, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, a new government came in, and there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, almost in all of these countries. And that's where all these crimes had been documented and reported, and the culprit had been named.
Name the culprit.
Well, one of them was General Pinochet, right? And what happened to that guy? Well, he died peacefully in his bed at home, surrounded by his loved ones, never brought to trial. He was briefly arrested in London, but that didn't prosper, and nothing ever happened.
And for those of you who don't know, General Pinochet was in Chile. There was the overthrow of a democratically elected government in Chile. My understanding is the CIA, the United States, were completely involved. They put in place a military dictatorship, Pinochet, who unleashed a reign of terror. Thousands died.
Yeah, reported that 4,000 people died, disappeared. It created the largest mass exodus of people living Chile, like me. I would never dream going anywhere. Why would I gonna go anywhere?
That's right. You're from Chile. Right?
Yeah, I'm from Chile, but the disruption to the family in a country that is very family oriented is huge. It's a total dislocation of values. An entire generation that it suddenly is gone, no longer exists. No continuity.
Yeah. And the United States has never answered for these crimes.
Well, no, they don't even sign. I mean, they are not even part of the International Crime Tribunal. They don't. They don't even signatories for that. They have asked and obtained immunity from a bundle of countries. Most of the countries in the world that want to have aid from the U.S. First, they had to sign an agreement giving up the right to trial any American soldier in their soil.
Say that again?
You didn't know this?
No.
Okay. Well,
in order to get American
in order to
aid,
get American aid or be part of the any of the American programs, the countries are required to sign a document giving immunity to U.S. officials and U.S. soldiers if they have committed a crime or they are accused of a crime committed in that country. So they have situations in Iraq, and for example, Iraq, that's of course one country that cannot be tried in there. They can kill people, but they cannot going to be tried. They had to be tried in the U.S. And I could probably tell you with one hand the countries that have not signed that, because most countries have that type of agreement. Something funny. Do you know why the United States will never have a military coup in their country? Why will there never be a military coup in the U.S.?
I don't know.
Because they don't have an American embassy.
That's a Central and South American joke, I guess, because all the coups are headquartered out of the American embassy.
Absolutely. That is the nest.
And these comments are not anti-American, folks, because the people of America have no idea of what's going on in their name for the most part, and no control over what their governments do. Their governments are not working for the people of the United States. They work for the corporations of the United States.
But we are all Americans.
Yes, we all live in
we live
North
in
America.
the American continent.
Yes.
We live in the North American continent, or the Central American continent, or the South American continent. So in a sense, we are all Americans, right? We all inhabit this continent. But it happens that an elite has chosen to even steal the name and appropriate the name. Nobody has given the right to say, well, this is America. No. You are North America, the United States of North America, just like the United States of Mexico. Right? But we are all Americans.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Anything else you want to say about the situation in El Salvador? So there was an election yesterday.
There was an election.
Leftist government.
And this government is facing a very, very difficult situation, of course.
I don't know.
It's the levels of poverty, inequality. They have soldiers in Iraq, not that many, but 300 as a sort of a symbolic force, which is one of the first things that this government, the new government, have promised to do, is to remove the soldiers immediately. But the challenges that they are facing are incredible. The economy is an economy entirely tied to the U.S. So people have tremendous hopes for this new government, but it'll be very difficult for them in 5 years to change what has been done to that country for decades. They have a plan, they have a program, they have a very ambitious program, which they presented to people, a platform, a political platform of national unity and economic recovery that they presented during the campaign. and it's very ambitious. And for people that are not aware about El Salvador and their politics, they might think, "Oh my God, the rebels, the Marxists are taking." No, it's really, when you look at it. I have read the program a couple of times. I think it's a program that I could think this program was created by perhaps an NDP candidate. It is not certainly a socialist revolutionary program. It's an ambitious program, yes, but it's nothing that is going to shake the system, the current system. It's going to reform the necessary reforms, and perhaps it will be a transition. This may be a government of transition to something else, something different, but for the time being, it is a government that does not intend, certainly, based on the program, to change the basic structure of the country, because they can't. They can't. It's impossible right now. But certainly there's hopes, lots of hopes for the country.
And I guess what they want to do is spread the wealth. I mean, that's probably number one.
Absolutely. One of the biggest problems in Latin America, the largest problems, is the land tenure. Who owns the land? It's a very reduced amount of people that owns the land. And not only they own the land, but in a country that is half the size of Vancouver Island, it is a problem if the land is not productive. And most of the land, large holdings in El Salvador, are passed from family to family. It's almost like a medieval system that still persists until today. So that is probably one of the first challenges that the government will be facing, the redistribution of the land and implementation of a land reform that will be able to feed people, provide them at least with the basic food stuff. But that's not going to be easy. I mean, when that was intended in 1979, 1970, it resulted in a civil war that lasted more than 12 years.
Okay, so you've just said that the last time there was an attempt at land reform in El Salvador, it ended in a civil war. Mm-hmm. And the two sides were, I guess, the landowners, backed by
the U.S. and the government.
And
the other side were peasants in a guerrilla army and popular organizations and even churches, actually.
Well, right now the government sides with the side that wants to redistribute the land. The United States probably isn't going to be as involved as it would have been 10 years ago. It has other problems. So maybe the land reform can take place. Also, now, for the first time really in my lifetime, there are other powerful Central and South American states with money that can assist El Salvador if they want to do this kind of land reform. For example, Venezuela, which is broadening its reach and moving in a social democratic or socialist, whatever you want, direction. So do things look a little bit better than they did the last time?
I think it does. The U.S. is worried about their own collapse, their own problems, which are huge. The Cold War is over. And that was a very important factor during that war. Because if the president and the State Department, their policies were dictated by the Cold War mentality. The policy was, we cannot let El Salvador or Nicaragua go leftist, because from there to going communistic is only one step, and we don't want the Soviets in our backyard. That was the whole reason for it. That's why they saw the problem. Well, that is not there anymore. That reality is not there anymore. Times have changed, and politicians have changed, and it would be impossible today for a government in Latin America, for a military government to take over in Latin America. The conditions are not in there, not in today's world.
So you're saying it would be impossible today for a military government to take over anywhere in Central or South America?
That's right.
Latin
the
America.
Political conditions, I believe, are not there for that. The U.S. will not allow it to begin with.
The U.S. wouldn't allow it.
No.
But they used to support it.
They used to support it under a different regime and in different times under a different logic. In today's world, they don't need that. Why would they need a huge military expenditures and expenses in the case of El Salvador to a tune of $1 billion a year when they can have or obtain the same results by integrating and absorbing their market. At the end of the
Oh,
day,
so you mean it's an economic warfare
absolutely.
instead of
At
a
the end of the
military
day,
warfare?
that's what they want. They want the raw materials, they want the production, they want the cheap labor, right? They want to flow back and forth. The Soviets are not in there anymore, so that that is irrelevant. But what is irrelevant is the economic portion of it, and they can achieve exactly the same thing by different means. And so I think that it would be impractical. It's an issue of practicality. It would be impractical for the U.S. to support that. The Organization of American States is a much more different today than it was 20 years ago when it was, again, functioning under the premise of the Cold War. Today, the Organization of American States, that comprises all the Latin American countries plus Canada, are not like that. Their role is much more progressive. Their mission is different. Their members are different. They have 6 or 7 members in there that are very powerful as a bloc, and they have generated a new way of thinking. They have generated a new interest in how to develop their economies, and that's a very important bloc. It's what I would call the socialist, social democratic bloc within the Organization of American States.
Now, you mentioned before we started talking on this show, actually, that you thought one of the most progressive situations in the world, progressive, well, maybe you can define progressive, but anyways, one of the most progressive situations in the world right now is taking place in Central and South America. It's showing leadership towards a good end. So maybe you can start by defining what is progressive and what's a good direction, and then talk about what's happening in Central and South America, Latin America.
What I would call as progressive is to progress, right? To go further ahead, right? To progress from where you come from, a departure from where we are, and from where we are now is collapse. It's outside. The collapse is there, not only economic, moral, ethical, political,
Environmental?
environmental. I mean, we need to progress from that. We need to go somewhere else, right? Well, these countries, particularly in Latin America, and I can name a few: Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and now El Salvador, are thinking differently. They are progressing in their thinking. They are proposing something different. They are saying, what we have now is suicidal. We're all going to be exterminated if we continue like this. Leave the ideology outside and leave the practicality. Just look outside and see what is happening. And they have formulated a program in different degrees. They're not all, in a little square ideological thing, box, But what they have in common is that they all have, say, the present model that we have is not applicable. We cannot follow that. We're going to collapse. We're going to be exterminated if we continue that. And the interesting part is that they're saying this not only applies to us in the Latin American continent, but to other countries of the world, because we all breathe the same air. We all drink the same water.
So what they're saying is that we are acting in a foolhardy way environmentally. We're acting by destroying so much of the environment. We're not doing well socially because what we've seen here in Canada is the same, except on a smaller scale as in Latin America. The wealthy get wealthier and the poor are getting poorer. And it's 10 times worse in Latin America than that is here. Well, those two things. If we could change those two things, I think that would be a big step forward towards the survival of the human race. Is that the kind of stuff they're talking about?
Absolutely. That is the ecological, environmental theme wasn't in the political lingo of the left 10 years ago. As recently as 10 years ago. It wasn't. It was all about some of the things, the economics and the equality on this and that. But there wasn't really a clearly defined policy given the importance to the environment. It wasn't. The social movement and the reality of life brought that discourse to the forefront, and made the change possible. So all of these governments, these progressive governments that I call progressive governments, are redefining the way to make politics and to formulate those programs in Latin America. And that's why I say they are in the forefront, because they are presenting an alternative. They are saying, what we have, it doesn't work. It won't work anymore. We want to change that. No other continent is portraying that. All continents are trying to modify a little bit of digging here, giving a little bit more money to the thieves, so they can continue doing their piracy, and see, twinkle a little bit,
Well, I think we can say that here too, that what we have doesn't work. I think we can say that in Canada, and I think it's very true. We need fundamental change, and maybe we can take a look at what is happening in some of the countries of Central and South America and maybe follow their lead. What are some of the things?
Well, for example, and this is very important, that because in Canada things are working. I disagree with you. They are working, but not for the majority. They are working for some. You see, it's not like we are all in the same boat. True, we are all in the same boat. This is something that an analogy. We are all in the same boat, but the boat has several decks.
You're not disagreeing with me.
No, I'm putting in a different perspective, right? That we are on the same boat. There's first class, and they have luxury accommodations, food 24 hours a day, music, nice swimming pool. Then you have a little bit below the deck, they have food. They don't have maybe the nice fancy things, but they can survive. Now the lowest one, they live right next to the engine room, right? Among all the oilers and things like that. They have to cook their own food. So we are on the same boat. Yes, true. But some are getting better treatment than others, right? And I think that's how I see the analogy in Canada. But anyways, going back to the question, or to the comment in particular, in Venezuela, for example, they have Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, actually, they have done something quite interesting that Canada actually is refusing to do. And that is to give constitutional status to the First Nations of the country. In each of those countries, the First Nations have a constitutionally recognized identity and as a nation within a nation. Canada, last year, I think it was one of the countries, probably half a dozen, that refused to sign the United Nations a convention on the recognition of First Nations in the world, and they refused to do it for Canada. But anyway, so these three countries in particular have done that. Another very interesting thing, for example, they have recognized the role of the woman, role of women, and they're saying women contribute to the well-being of the country, to the well-being of the family, and the work that they do at home is value-added work. It's not like they go home and do nothing, right? Raising the children, cleaning up the house, that is work and hard work.
And value-added work.
And value-added work.
The most value-added work.
Absolutely. So there's a recognition of that. But not only that, it goes beyond that. Social security. Even though you have never worked outside home, you are entitled to Social Security, to unemployment insurance.
So mothers.
To all of those things. Mothers.
Wow.
Mothers, right, who are at home, they are entitled to that. Constitutionally. It's guaranteed by the Constitution.
How about daycare?
Likewise. Same thing.
So even though they don't have money, and they probably can't do a lot of these things.
Well, they do. Actually, they receive a small pension for now because they can't afford a huge pension, but they receive a small pension. That is a recognition of the valuable work that women do at home, right? These three countries in particular, by law.
And which three countries are these? Venezuela?
Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia. They have in their constitution, they are forbidden to install foreign military bases, which is a huge step in Latin America.
Say that again?
Foreign military bases.
They're forbidden.
They are forbidden. They cannot have military bases foreign military bases in their soil, right? Yeah. Now, other countries that don't have that type of article in their constitution have American bases. Colombia has at least 6.
Canada?
Canada, right?
I don't know if we have American bases, but we do have an agreement now.
We are part of it. I mean, we are in the NORAD, the north part. So some of these things are in there. For example, Venezuela, just last week. A very progressive type of legislation that I wish that we would have in this country, because it would prevent the type of ransacking that we are observing in the fishing industry, right? The parliament passed a law last week forbidding the fishing. What do you call this fishing? We have this huge fish net, this huge
trawlers, drift nets.
Drift nets. They are forbidden by law. In fact, the entire fleet was put out of commission. No longer exists. They sank the boat for reefs. And they left a small portion of boats for co-ops and community projects. But the fleet no longer exists. It's not allowed in the territorial waters because of the destruction, what it does. When they drag these nets, they take everything with it, including, all type of fish and all type of...
I don't know what that means exactly, but I do know that the drift nets and the trawlers are causing huge problems. And I'm not surprised that we didn't hear much about that in our media either, because these are the stories they really don't want to tell us.
No, I mean, look at Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Labrador. Communities devastated. The small fisher person that used to have a little boat could go out, him and his family, earn a living. They can. First of all, the type of licenses, they changed the licensing system. So you had to be a millionaire to buy a license, to earn your living, right? So only the big multinational companies that can afford to pay millions of dollars for licenses, they can have these floating refrigerated fishing vessels that take everything. So the small artisanal fishing is gone.
And
right?
Canada itself is completely to blame for the total disaster of the cod fishery off the coast of Newfoundland. We were told that it was the Europeans and the Spanish, but it wasn't. It was Canada. And we were never told that because, in the myth, in the story, it's better to blame somebody else than to take responsibility ourselves for the environmental disasters that we are not only creating then, but still creating now with the tar sands and the destruction of our forests and everything else that we do. That's why we need change.
Absolutely.
We need progressive change.
Progressive change. Not just any change, but progressive change.
What used to work doesn't work anymore.
And cannot be sustainable.
How much time do we have left? We've got only a couple of minutes left. Since you mentioned the word sustainable, maybe you could say something about Victoria, the city of Victoria here, the city's new sustainability policy
program
plan.
Yes. I think it's certainly it's done with the best intentions, and there's some good points, but I think they are missing the boat. They are confusing the symptoms with the illness. My first question would be, what are they trying to sustain? Sustainability means to prolong in the future, to extend in the future. If what has been trying to extend and prolong in the future is the wasteful, overconsumption, wasteful lifestyle that we have, I would say, let's make it collapse completely, because that's really what's going to happen if we don't address that fundamental point. So when it says sustainability in a vacuum, I have a problem with that concept. Please define what is it that you want to sustain. I think that they need to look the larger picture. We cannot continue consuming and wasting the resources the way that we have. And in order to change that, we have to change the social order. As simple as that. We cannot, the people that brought us the problem, they are not going to bring us the solution. They are part of the problem, right? And we can never expect solution from those pirates, those thieves who are now asking for bailout. They will never bring a solution. We have to think differently. And just saying, let's be sustainable, but without analyzing what is it that we're trying to sustain, I think is misleading. I don't think they're doing it intentionally, because I think there's good individuals. But they're missing, in their analysis, they're missing the larger picture, in my view anyways.
We've been talking with Carlos Flores of the Central American Support Committee. We've talked about Latin America. We've talked about the United States' role in Latin America. We've talked a little bit about Canada. We've talked about some ideas, some progressive ideas, some of the kinds of changes that are going to have to be made in the world we face today. And Carlos finished by saying, I think, that the people who got us here are not necessarily the people who can get us out of this mess, both environmentally and economically. So we really need some fundamental changes here in Canada as well. Thank you for watching. This has been Face to Face.